So, as we're here at the end of another lovely year on this little green and blue marble, well, mostly grey if you live up here in the northeast of England, it makes sense to reflect on what's come before. We've seen amazing matches, incredible debuts, scintillating storylines, and we're not talking about any of these today, no siree, because it's time to gather around and get a little bit angry together as we're going to look back at the absolutely pitiful matches put on by the WWE. Now, I can probably hear you all typing already, what culture is so negative? And true, this isn't going to be a nice, happy list. However, we're only putting this out as a call to arms, to ask for something better in 2019. And while it's good to be grateful for what you do have, as this year has wound down and ratings have slumped for the WWE's flagship show, I think it's clear that a lot of you will agree that 2018 was a bit rough around the edges. However, if you want to take it up with me, then you can do so in the comments. Tell me your worst matches of 2018. I'd love to hear them. With this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these were the 10 worst WWE matches of 2018. And just for the record, these aren't in any particular order. Number 10. Brock Lesnar vs Roman Reigns, WrestleMania 34. There was something depressingly familiar about Brock Lesnar's WrestleMania 34 victory over Roman Reigns. Worst of all, it mattered not what either men did anyway. The sound of boos was carried loudly across the arena, as well as some beach balls, and with every failed F5, the match became a parody of itself. This was the culmination of Brock destroying everything with one finisher, and here it was being hammered home that Reigns was above and beyond these other mere mortals. The two weren't doing anything outwardly bad, but the New Orleans faithful let loose on the pair, seeing them both as the pinnacles of frustration within the company. One, a fighting champion who never actually fought to defend his belt unless he deemed it worthy, and the other being the face of the company that was booed more than their biggest heels. Technically, this was at best an okay match, but it did neither men's service nor the crowd. Number 9. CARMELLA vs ASUKA, Money in the Bank. It'd be too easy to rule out James Ellsworth's return here as catastrophic considering the controversy that engulfed him later in the year, so let's just view this match for what it was rather than the Ellsworth in a Sellsworth that it would become. And it was pretty dire. His reintroduction could and should have helped the Princess of Staten Island, but like Charlotte at WrestleMania before her, this match was less about the winner and more to do with the desperate decline of the loser. Asuka's show of shows defeat against Charlotte Flair was divisive at best, and fans were begging to see if the ending of the streak would lead to a renewed fire within the Empress of Tomorrow here. But this was not the case, and those that were crying out to see where the story goes were silenced when Carmella reigned supreme at the end of the night. The action itself was passable, but the ending was poor, with Asuka looking like a proper goof for a good old while as she became entranced by herself. The reveal of Ellsworth was laughable and ushered in another era of cringe, but at least thanks to TLC 2018, Asuka finally got her spot at the top of the mountain. Number 8. The Revival vs Gallows and Anderson, Raw 25. Jobbed out to Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson in order to get the real stars D-Generation X siphoning the last remnants of Finn Balor's heat, Dash Wilder and Scott Dawson weren't sacrificial lambs so much as piles of kebab burnt to a crisp. When the Revival hit the scene, their gimmick of, well, not having a gimmick was a breath of fresh air for the roster, something that immediately went stale as Vince deemed it not something that could be marketed and slid the pair down the ladder. Seeing DX absolutely crush them was as if Vince had orchestrated the events to be his personal reenactment of the WWE versus the NWA. It was a true shame to see them receive so much punishment without any sort of a chance of a push after, and while it did pop the crowd somewhat, it was the bubble bursting for the team that was the lasting image. Number 7. Jeff Hardy vs Jinder Mahal, Greatest Royal Rumble. Jinder Mahal better be sending Titus a big thank you card this year after he was effectively saved by the Titus World Slide incident. If not, then that whisper in the wind heard round the world would have been the talking point of the event, whiffing just as hard as this matchup. All this did was highlight the torturous WWE Championship run that we'd endured months before. This was a match that was, as you'd expect from a high flyer and a man who seemingly cannot sell a single bump. It exposed the latter's weakness while providing no elevation for the former. It was a match that we all sat through and felt it pass through our eyes and out the backs of our heads, save only to log that infamous botch. Number 6. Nicholas and Braun win Tag Team Gold, WrestleMania 34. It was a banter match match that made a mockery of the tag division. I get that it popped the crowd and was funny to see unfold, but it's a strange way to establish that your tag division is so in need of a refresh that a large man and a child can win the gold. If I wanted to watch a kid hold gold over his head in a ridiculous circumstance, then I'd watch Charlie and the Bloody Chocolate Factory. Here, though, it turned everyone into a Willy Wanker and led nowhere. Number 5, Nia Jax versus Alexa Bliss, Backlash. Nia is, in my opinion, a very tough opponent for anyone to face in the ring. For a start, there's the risk that she could absolutely batter you by accident, and second, her limited moveset and inconsistencies when selling means that you have to work around her rather than with her most times. That's the impression that I get from watching anyone wrestle her, and it was highlighted to the nth degree when she faced Bliss at Backlash. This was already a bit of a wet bread pay-per-view as it was, and we are not ducks, we do not like wet bread, but this match was both botch-riddled, dragged on for ages, and was a terrible culmination of their storyline about body shaming, an angle that actually had steam when it began earlier in the year. But here, though, it had completely run out of it and led to Nia reeling off some awfully stock and laboured positive messages at the end, while also insinuating that the best way to beat your bullies wasn't to break the cycle of violence, but to fight them instead. Great advice, that. Number 4, Braun Strowman versus Kevin Owens, Extreme Rules. Kevin Owens was victorious once on pay-per-view in 2018 before a mid-year injury put him on the shelf, and that win was an absolute joke. His 2018 plunge was as figurative as it was literal, with his lone win coming at the result of an almighty fall which, under the stipulations, meant that he was victorious. The match was a terrible tale told, well, terribly, with it being the culmination of Strowman deciding to bully Owens relentlessly and get cheered for it. In the ring, he acted like an idiot, taking too long to react, or even attempting to, win by just escaping the cage. Instead, he took too long and Braun, the babyface, ripped away his handcuffs to return to brutalizing KO as vindication before the giant match-ending bump. The mechanisms were knackered, the mechanisms are knackered, Braun Strowman is knackered. Kevin Owens was probably never more relieved to just be knackered. Number 3, Roman Reigns versus Samoa Joe, Backlash. This match absolutely tanked, and it would take a hard press to try and find the positives. I would even challenge Simon Miller to do it. I mean, fans exited in droves as it went on, which was by far the biggest indication of a duff contest. And it's a real shame because Samoa Joe is a main event star. He deserved this pay-per-view spot. But because of it being just a week since the Greatest Royal Rumble, and it being just 4 weeks since Mania, it's so easy to see why people were so willing to give up on this event. The fans had simply had enough of seeing Reigns in the main event, and I don't mean that as an attack against his person, but as a talent. He'd lost twice against Brock Lesnar and didn't even remotely sell that this contest with Joe was worth his time, and Joe didn't get the time he needs to sink his hooks in and make people care. Backlash was easily the worst pay-per-view of the year, and people just had simply seen enough to know what they wanted, and that was to beat the traffic home. Number 2, the Brothers of Destruction versus D-Generation X, Crown Jewel. This match was the perfect expression of be careful what you wish for, as when all of the legends were announced for this matchup, the roof was ripped off every house around the world. But when it came to actually seeing it play out, it was like watching myths erode in front of your very eyes. Taker versus Reigns back in 2017 was a perfect time to call it quits for the dead man. He was on form by basically showing that he was at the end of his mortal in-ring coil. Yet here, it was laboured and gassed, much like all the men involved. Trips took an injury, Michaels looked like he was covered in more than a little ring rust, Kane couldn't even keep his bloody mask on. This was just sad. It had its moments, but these moments were passable at best. And when you're looking at the drawing power of these giants, that is not okay. These were not the quartet that left a blood-soaked cell in 1997, having crafted one of the greatest moments in the history of the industry, nor even the 3 that ended an era in a WrestleMania this decade. These were the ghosts haunting the images of their former selves. And number 1, The Undertaker versus Triple H, Super Showdown. It feels wrong to continue talking about 2 superstars from the previous worst match entry, but it's entirely justified because this is where the former entry began and should have been a clear sign that this was the time to call it off. You'll hear the "this is awesome" chants die mere moments after you think the action will change for the better, as any momentum gained throughout these situations fizzled when the men didn't have the strength to capitalize on it. This was a slow match, an indulgent match, which cut short the times of other, younger, arguably more deserving stars. I say that not to piss on what these men have accomplished, but what they were doing here, which was laying on the floor, gasping for air, requiring their two friends to pop in and act as rodeo clowns until the bulls were ready to rage again, was not okay. It was the saddest moment to sit down with all of the wrestling team after the event and struggle to try and find the high moments, seeking desperately for something to tickle that nostalgic itch. But these moments were few and far between. Now, it's not clear if Taker and company are going to square up again, but if 2018 is anything to go by, then we, along with so many other fans, pray that it doesn't happen.